There's something happening right now that's so massive, it's quietly reshaping the global energy landscape, computing infrastructure, and even international power dynamics. And most people have no idea it's occurring. Back in March, there was an abandoned factory in Mississippi. Just 6 months later, something unprecedented now stands in its place. A machine the size of a city, built not for people but for artificial intelligence. Nearly 1 million GPUs under one roof, consuming enough electricity to power over 2 million homes. This is Colossus 2, and understanding what it took to build it reveals a shocking truth about where technology is really headed. Because here's what nobody's talking about. AI companies aren't just building data centers anymore. They're becoming energy corporations, and the race to control artificial intelligence is rapidly transforming into a race to control gigawatts of power. What happens inside facilities like Colossus 2 will determine not just which companies win, but potentially which nations maintain technological dominance in the coming decades. Let me show you what it actually takes to build a machine that's consuming more electricity than some entire countries. Let me show you what it actually takes to build a machine that's consuming more electricity than some entire countries. The network that thinks like one brain. When you hear about a facility with 500,000 GPUs, you might imagine rows of powerful computers sitting next to each other, each doing its own calculations. That's not what Colossus 2 actually is. The real breakthrough isn't the individual processors. It's making them all function as a single unified supercomputer. Inside each rack, NVIDIA's NVLink technology stitches 72 GPUs together so tightly they behave like one giant processor. But the real engineering challenge comes when you try to scale this beyond individual racks. Picture thousands of racks spread across multiple halls, each packed with GPUs. Unless they can move data in perfect synchronization, you don't get increased power, you get chaos. That's where Colossus 2's true advantage emerges. NVIDIA's Spectrum-X Ethernet fabric connects everything at terabyte speeds, allowing over 550,000 GPUs to operate like a single coordinated brain. Forget the 1 gigabit per second internet connection in your home. Each link here runs at 400 gigabits per second, with every GPU server pushing up to 3.6 terabits per second of bandwidth. Why does this matter so critically? Because in AI training at this scale, timing is everything. If data arrives late, even by milliseconds, GPUs end up processing outdated information and efficiency collapses by half. Special chips handle networking, storage, and security separately so the GPUs can focus exclusively on actual computation. From the outside, it looks like a warehouse, but inside, it's the largest AI supercomputer on Earth. And the network is what transforms separate hardware into one coherent thinking machine, capable of delivering 50 exaflops of compute, roughly 7 times more than the world's top 10 fastest supercomputers combined. The cooling factory nobody sees. Here's a number that should terrify you. A 1 gigawatt data center generates 1 gigawatt of heat. That's the thermal output of an entire industrial power plant trapped inside 4 walls. The heat is so intense that if you captured it with proper recovery systems, you could generate roughly 15 megawatts of secondary power, enough electricity to run a small city. But almost all of that heat has to be eliminated instead, and cooling alone consumes roughly 30% of the total energy bill. This problem is getting exponentially worse as AI racks become denser. If cooling stops for even 2 minutes, GPUs slow down, then racks crash, and components begin taking permanent damage. The industry learned this lesson brutally. Meta actually demolished an entire data center mid-construction because its design couldn't handle the density required for modern AI. The cooling techniques that worked perfectly fine for social media and video streaming collapsed instantly when confronted with the heat densities of current generation AI chips. At Colossus 2 scale, air cooling is laughably inadequate. What you need is water, and shocking amounts of it. Average AI data centers can consume millions of gallons daily, competing directly with cities, farms, and entire regions for this critical resource. Many of America's largest data centers are being built in the worst possible locations, water-scarce regions like Arizona and Nevada, where every gallon is already contested. xAI's solution was both extreme and surprisingly elegant. They built what amounts to a second factory, a water factory, right on the campus. The world's largest ceramic membrane bioreactor, essentially a massive wastewater treatment plant. Instead of draining Memphis's underground drinking water, Colossus takes dirty wastewater from the city and converts it into purified water for cooling. The scale is staggering: 13 million gallons per day of recycled water. That's actually more than the data center needs, making this a rare case where an AI facility improves rather than depletes local water resources. Inside, cooling operates like an industrial assembly line, moving heat systematically until it's expelled from the building. Every rack has its own plumbing system. Coolant flows through thin channels called manifolds, feeding cold liquid directly into cold plates bolted onto every GPU, CPU, and memory chip. These plates function like miniature radiators, extracting heat straight from the silicon. As liquid passes through chips, it heats to about 45 degrees Celsius. Sensors constantly track flow and temperature because a stoppage could destroy tens of thousands of dollars worth of GPUs in seconds. The warm coolant transfers to distribution units, then flows to 119 massive air-cooled chillers outside the halls. They work like giant car radiators, stripping 5 to 7 degrees Celsius from the water each cycle before sending it back inside. Roughly 15% of the total investment, approximately $3 billion, went into building this cooling system alone. The silicon stack behind the intelligence. To understand what Colossus 2 actually does, you need to understand the silicon stack powering it. Everything starts with GPUs, and that means NVIDIA. Colossus 2 began with 200,000 Hopper GPUs, then expanded with another 350,000 of NVIDIA's latest GB200 and GB300 Blackwell GPUs. The GB300, known as Blackwell Ultra, is manufactured on TSMC's 4nm process and delivers over 20 petaflops of compute per chip. Raw compute still needs orchestration, which is where AMD's EPYC and Intel Xeon CPUs enter, handling control, scheduling, and background workloads that keep hundreds of thousands of GPUs functioning as one system. Then come the networking chips we discussed earlier. None of this would function without high-bandwidth memory, predominantly from SK Hynix, pumping terabytes of data per second into compute cores, ensuring GPUs stay fully utilized. Finally, petabytes of SSD storage stream training data fast enough to keep every rack constantly busy. This represents an enormous amount of silicon, and ironically, this still isn't the finish line. The long-term target is scaling Colossus 2 to 1 million GPUs, all stitched into a single working machine. Roughly half of the $20 billion total investment went into silicon and hardware infrastructure alone. The power plant that came first. Here's what most people don't understand about building a gigawatt-scale data center. You don't start with computers, you start with power, in every sense of that word. Without gigawatts of stable energy, the racks stay permanently dark. When you want to build a data center at this scale, the first challenge is brutal and simple. Where do you find a gigawatt of electrical power? Even if you somehow secure that much energy, how do you push it into one building without completely frying the regional grid? At this magnitude, you're not plugging into existing infrastructure. You're building a new electrical backbone from scratch. You need substations, switchgear, transformers, backup systems, and distribution lines feeding directly into the racks. When building an AI data center, the first thing you actually construct is a power factory. That's where the drama of Colossus 2 began. The facility needed at least 1 full gigawatt, with plans to scale toward 2. The city of Memphis, Tennessee could barely spare 50 megawatts. Colossus needed 1,000. Regulators refused. Communities pushed back. For a moment, the entire project appeared dead. Until I did something extreme. They crossed the state line into South Haven, Mississippi, just miles from Memphis. The site was a former Duke Energy power plant with gas pipelines and grid connections already in place, though the turbines were long gone. They acquired the defunct gas plant, which was perfect for rebuilding. Then came the genuinely bold move, purchasing natural gas turbines overseas and shipping them to the United States. They found a former European power plant, broke it into container-sized modules, shipped everything across the Atlantic, and reassembled it in Mississippi. It sounds insane, but it proved far faster than conventional construction methods. It worked. Within just months, the turbines were spinning. 7 Titan-class units, each exceeding 35 megawatts, together bringing approximately 460 megawatts online. But solving power generation was only half the challenge. The real problem isn't just delivering electricity, it's maintaining perfect stability. GPUs spike power demand in milliseconds. Such sudden surges can drop voltage and, in worst cases, cascade through entire halls. Restarting these computational runs isn't merely annoying, it wastes millions of dollars in compute resources. NVIDIA's advancements actually make this worse through increased density. These aren't ordinary racks anymore, drawing 50 kilowatts. With new Blackwell chips, power draw jumps from 50 kilowatts to 130 kilowatts per rack. At this scale, each rack consumes as much electricity as a small neighborhood. Colossus 2 pairs its turbines with 168 Tesla megapacks, essentially giant rechargeable batteries. They absorb energy when demand is low and release it instantly when demand surges. Power doesn't flow straight from the grid to racks. It moves through a layered system built for stability. The grid and backup diesel generators feed into megapacks, which smooth out spikes, before electricity routes through power distribution into rack arrays. The result is steady, predictable power to hundreds of thousands of GPUs. Power infrastructure alone consumed roughly 20% of the budget, billions spent before installing a single server. Without that bold move across state borders, Colossus 2 simply wouldn't exist. The energy arms race. Nobody's discussing. Looking at the broader AI landscape, the real bottleneck isn't algorithms or talent anymore. It's energy. Access to stable, abundant electricity now determines who can train the best models, and ultimately who wins or falls behind in artificial intelligence development. That's why AI labs are quietly transforming into energy companies. Microsoft is restarting the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant to secure roughly 850 megawatts of clean energy specifically for AI. Google is funding 3 new nuclear power plants for the same reason. This is absolutely crazy when you consider that just 10 years ago, the largest data centers ran on mere tens of megawatts. Today, AI demands gigawatts, energy sufficient to power entire cities, consumed exclusively to keep models running. Hyperscalers are now on track to control more nuclear power capacity than some nuclear nations possess. Long-term, whoever can secure the most energy will shape the balance of power not just among technology companies, but potentially among entire nations. And Colossus 2 isn't alone. Switch's Citadel campus in Nevada operates roughly 250,000 GPUs, consuming 650 megawatts across 1.3 million square feet. But Colossus 2 isn't just bigger, it represents an entirely new class of AI data center. OpenAI and Microsoft are building Stargate with total planned capacity reaching nearly 10 gigawatts, with the flagship campus near Abilene, Texas targeting 1 gigawatt by 2026 alone. Hundreds more AI data centers are breaking ground across the United States, China, and Europe, each demanding more land, steel, turbines, and energy. Hyperscalers now command more electrical capacity than some countries. We're building an entirely new industrial layer, power-hungry AI factories dependent on the same resources every community and nation requires. You don't build one data center, you build 4 factories. As you've seen, constructing a facility like Colossus 2 means simultaneously building 4 distinct factories. Power generation, cooling systems, networking infrastructure, and finally compute hardware. Miss one component, and everything collapses like removing a leg from a chair. When it comes to cost distribution, compute represents by far the largest factory. The second biggest expense is power infrastructure. Everything else exists simply to keep the system alive and operational. This explains why NVIDIA has become the world's most valuable company. They're providing the engines for the most expensive machines humanity has ever constructed. The pace of construction has been staggering. What typically takes other companies more than 16 months to build, Colossus 2 accomplished in just 6 months. Already in October, just weeks from now, Colossus 2 will activate. The facility is built to train xAI's largest models, power next-generation autonomous driving systems, and train humanoid robots. The strategy is straightforward. In artificial intelligence, the lab with access to the most compute moves fastest and sets the pace for everyone else. That's why Colossus 2 represents more than a data center. It's a $20 billion strategic bet on computational dominance. The questions we should be asking. But facilities like this don't just process numbers and perform calculations. They're consuming absolutely massive amounts of electricity and water. The costs aren't merely financial. Eventually, societies may need to decide who gets this energy, people or machines. Whether you care about cheaper AI tools, rising energy bills, or who wins the next technological race, what's happening inside Colossus 2 will directly impact your life. Right now, we're constructing an entirely new industrial layer that depends on the same fundamental resources every community requires. The hope, of course, is that all of this computational power will ultimately benefit humanity. Perhaps AI will help us discover revolutionary new energy sources, develop breakthrough drugs, extend human lifespan, or solve problems we can't currently imagine. Whether that optimistic vision materializes or not, only time will reveal. But one thing is certain, the age of gigawatt-scale AI factories has arrived, and the companies and nations that control energy access will increasingly control artificial intelligence development itself. That's not a future prediction. That's happening right now, behind the walls of facilities most people will never see. The real question isn't whether this technology is impressive. It obviously is. The question is whether we're prepared for a world where training artificial intelligence consumes as much power as running entire cities, and where access to electricity becomes the ultimate competitive advantage in the global technology race. What's being built inside these massive facilities will shape the next chapter of technological development. Understanding what it takes to construct them is understanding where our entire civilization is heading.